Hello, Virginia Synod. My name is Tyler Derrick. I'm a member at St. Philip Lutheran Church in Roanoke, Virginia, and today we're going to talk about Hezekiah and purifying the temple. The reading that I'm going to be doing a devotion on today is from 2 Chronicles, chapter 29, verses 1 through 11. And as I was saying earlier, it's about purifying the temple, or in more perhaps modern language, cleaning house. So Hezekiah is a very young king of Judah, um, whose predecessors before him, particularly his father, spurned God a little bit. He turned away from God, or erected false shrines. I've got my handy dandy student Bible here, which has a helpful little 100 people you should know section. And there were some really crazy things happening in Judah before Hezekiah's time, including the worshiping of Moses's bronze snake. So a lot of really not great Christian-like things were going on before Hezekiah. But Hezekiah comes in at a very young age. The very first verse from this chapter is, for me, the most important, and I'll read it here, and I'll explain why in a second. It is, Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 29 years. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. So for me, why this is so important is because at the very start of this reading, it's talking about how young, in fact, Hezekiah is when he comes into his kingship. In fact, only 2 years older than I am now, which just speaks to the power that youth can have in their own faithfulness. I think oftentimes, particularly using my own story here, it's important to understand that children are not their fathers and they're not their mothers. Oftentimes they can be a combination of the two, but they are also their own unique person. To use my own individual story here, I am in fact a double pastor's son. My father is the presiding head pastor at my congregation, David Derrick, and my mother is the assistant to the bishop for the Virginia Synod, Kelly Dawn Bear Derrick. So for a long time, my faith life felt predetermined by whatever they believed. So it was particularly powerful for me, in fact, with this reading, is that's not always the case. In fact, sometimes young adults can have a very unique experience and a very unique spiritual and faithful life that oftentimes can look different from their own. Of course, in Hezekiah's case, it's not too difficult to have a different faith or spiritual life when compared to your father, since, of course, his father did not have a spiritual life in any way, shape, or form, or rather, he did, just it happened to be the wrong God. So for me, that was a very personal connection that we are not. I even put it in all caps in my notes. Hezekiah is not his father. But to close here, I'm also particularly struck by, as I again relate to my student Bible here, that the world around Hezekiah during his reign was in chaos. The Assyrians were ransacking much of the Levant during this time, including his sister nation of Israel, which I would have, if it was me, particularly looked for help elsewhere outside of God, probably if I was in his shoes, but that's not Hezekiah. Hezekiah instead turns to God and instead chooses God as his cornerstone to then support himself and fend off the oncoming invasion, as it were. And to start with that, you need to then clean out God's house, being the temple. So hopefully that's some food for thought here from a very old, perhaps not quite as heard from reading about Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles. Thanks, everyone.